You got it, Jay?
Session.
Push the bottom button, the side button down. Top button. Here, pay me.
Well, top or bottom? Which way is up?
Yeah, that one down. And then I put this back on. Okay, it's 7:02 now, and I'm reconvening the regular open session of the City Council, City of Bandera. After our discussion in closed session, I believe that the consensus of council is that we'd like to hear Alan's statement, either given by Alan or by his attorney. So if you would address the council, Alan.
Yeah, my name's Alan Calloway. I lived here all my life. I pay my taxes. I worked here for the city almost 5 years, and I worked part-time for almost 4 years for mine, get in where I can get in. And then on April the 5th, on a Friday morning, we all come to work and do our thing, and everybody was having a good time. Well, one of the employees came up to me and said, "You smell something on somebody?" I said, "Yes." I didn't say nothing. I said, "I'm not going to say nothing because everything falls back on me." And I did what. So we cleaned up, doing our trucks and doing everything we're supposed to do. Another couple other employees said, "Let's have some tacos." And I said, "Okay. If they're okaying it, I'll give you money, and I'm gonna go to the park, do my thing like I always do." But I get a guy right over there to get the tacos. And he says, "I gotta do something about this." I said, "Okay, if you do, I don't want to be involved in it because it's gonna come back on me and I'm gonna get in trouble." I said, "I want no trouble and everything." And me and one of the supervisors don't get along too well, and I'm trying to keep the peace like I was told. That's what happened, and then all of a sudden, about 9:45 or 9:15, something like that, Mark came to the park, and that's what happened. I told him what happened. Everybody's having a good time, enjoying themselves. They asked for tacos. We went and got tacos, me and another employee. And he told somebody, he got in the truck, he told me he had told something to somebody. And I told him, "I'm going to get in trouble for it. You watch and see." And that's what happened.
Is that everything you want to tell us? Thank you. Council, do you have any questions for Alan? At this time, Council, would you like to make a motion?
If I could, Mayor, I'd like to read from Mr. Calloway's termination letter that he was provided on April 10th. In part, it says, "While this action does not constitute a specific violation, you have been directed to take any complaints, comments, concerns, and issues to the Public Works Director. It should be noted that you have been reprimanded both verbally and in writing for the same action by the previous city administrator and or the Public Works Director foreman. The violation you are being terminated for comes from your untruthfulness when asked about the incident on Friday, April 5, 2019. You denied being a part of it. You later denied what was actually said. Furthermore, you contacted another DPW employee and asked him to confirm your alleged story if the Public Works Director asked you about your phone call. Based on the information provided by our city administrators, I move that we uphold the termination of Mr. Calloway.
Do I have a second?
I will second the motion.
Rebecca, second. We've already had an extensive discussion. Is there any further discussion you'd like to, or any comments you'd like to make at this time?
I will not be voting on
Thank you, Glenn. If there's no other discussion, all in favor of upholding the termination of Alan Calloway?
I just want to make sure that you acknowledge Alan's attorney and whether or not you want to give him the floor. He's raising his hand. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Yes, can we just get on the record, because the letter that you just read is very vague. For untruthfulness, doesn't explain what untruthfulness and what incident that he was a part of.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Bryce, Rebecca, Lynn, and Tom are all in favor, and Glenn abstains. So the motion is to deny, or to uphold the termination of Ellen Callaway. All right, we're gonna move on to item 9. A is request by St. Stanislaus Church for street closure on 7th Street between Cypress and Cedar for the parish festival on Sunday, May 4th, 2019 at noon until Monday, May 6th, 2019 at 9 a.m. All right, here you go, Ms. Dennis.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Sorry for the wait.
Oh, that's okay, I understand procedures. We're having our annual Parish Festival starting this summer, this Sunday. And we would like to shut down the street starting Saturday. As we set up everything on Saturday, pretty big deal. It takes us all day to set everything up. And I have tents, some tents, large tents coming from True Value that are going to be set up also. So we're going to be doing that all day on Saturday. So we'd like, with the city's permission, to have the street shut down on Saturday morning and to open back up on Monday morning. That's the earliest I can get True Value over there, 8 o'clock Monday morning, to take their tents down. If that's not possible, it has to be open Sunday evening, then I'll figure something out.
So in your request is from Saturday, May the 4th, 2019 at noon until Monday, May the 6th, 2019 at 8 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
9 a.m., I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Rebecca makes a motion to
Request.
approve.
Sorry.
Glenn seconds. Any further discussion on this item?
One
Rebecca?
question, I'm sure you guys, I know that there's one residential home with their driveway on that
Yes,
street, and
ma'am.
you guys all work that out together.
Yes, ma'am, we accommodate them,
Yeah.
we notify them, but we also accommodate them to where that, we do not block their driveway, and when the city brings the cones and stuff, we move them over, so if they need to get out, ingress, egress, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Thank you.
Thank you
Item
very
B,
much.
Discussion and direction for possible amendments to ordinance 3.09 signs. Rebecca, go ahead.
I was just going to hopefully suggest that we conduct at least a brief workshop about this to give the full item the attention it needs. And being a little bit presumptuous that we might not have our regular meeting on May 16th, that maybe we hold it then, and then put this on the May 26th in the event that we moved a regular meeting.
The reason for the May 16th moving the meeting is because Jay and Jill and I are going to be at a camp.
You guys want to leave it to us?
No. But I really have a lot to say about the sign ordinance.
Okay.
There are things in there that
Well,
I
what
don't
about
think-
the day before? Well, are you
we're
in
going to be
favor?
gone. We're
of
going to be
the-
gone from Tuesday till Thursday, Friday.
Okay.
Come back Friday.
We're coming back Friday.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know, I just get.
Well, but scheduling a workshop wherever we can and having this then back on the next agenda.
Let's wait till Jill gets back, and we'll throw some dates out to y'all if that's agreeable with council, because I too, I have some real concerns with some of this, and as I explained in my letter, P and Z presented it to us, it took 4 votes to overturn it. I think we could have made some amendments at that time, or even returned it to P and Z for further review, so I think we need to have a discussion about this. Lynn?
I agree with that too. I'd like for us to be able to discuss it further, and I'd also like for the code enforcement officer to possibly be at the workshop as well, so he can kind of tell us what problems he may be having enforcing what is now the ordinance. So I'd like to have his input as well.
Okay.
So we'll make a motion to table the item.
Why don't we leave it at this? Why don't we ask,
Dan
just
has
discussion and
something to say.
direction?
Dan wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm
If
sorry.
I could, Mayor, just one word of caution, when you have your workshop, before you adopt anything, repealing any parts of your ordinance, I would really like to look at it, because there are so many pieces that are tied together. We don't want to inadvertently prevent ourselves from enforcing other portions by trying to fix a problem, a perceived problem, or whatever the case may be. The other thing I would suggest is that, as part of your direction, if you have concerns about the way this ordinance is being enforced, you can suspend enforcement or ask or direct staff to suspend enforcement of particular provision. Like if there's a particular provision that you have concerns about, and you want to put a moratorium on enforcement until you have this workshop, you have that authority as well. Or you can do it informally, just by directing the administrator. So. I just don't know what issues you're talking about. I don't know how big of a problem this is. So.
Well, there's some things in it that, well, one of my things right up top is the height of the signs that's being allowed, and,
I thought we specific.
yeah.
Sorry.
There are just a lot of things that I think we need to address. P&Z looked at it page by page, item by item, piece
I was
by
here.
piece.
I was here for a joint
Yes.
workshop. We went through it.
Yeah, after the workshop, when they had their meeting. But I really think there are things that we should have paid closer attention to when reading it after P&Z brought it back to us, because they made no changes to the original
After the
draft at
joint
all.
workshop,
That's correct.
we had discussed changes.
Mhm. So, I believe the way I'd like to leave this is when Jill gets back in town next week, she's at grant writing school, that, we figure out what her schedule is too, because I think she needs to be present for this as well. If you don't think so, then y'all can have it without us, but I'd like to be here for it, and I think
Yeah.
Jay needs to be here for it too, so, yes.
But I'd like to keep the ordinance as is in place right now. To keep it in place as it is right now, because the ordinance is passed and is in place right now. So I would like to keep it that way until we have a workshop, and then if we have issues with parts of it, or we want to do a moratorium on parts of it, then we'll send it to our attorney to see what his recommendations are, and then continue that way. But right now, I think we should enforce what we have.
In that case, and I have to agree with you, we've already got it in place, and we are not prepared tonight to sit and pick it
No.
apart. But what about the week of May the 6th, next week, the 6th through the 10th? Anybody have anything going on?
Only on
P and Z and
I'll be out of town the
EDC.
9th and the 10th.
Monday next week, I will not be available. Monday
You
or
have an
Friday.
EDC meeting on the 8th, I believe, don't you?
yes.
So Tuesday or Thursday
And
next week.
Tuesday is P&Z, is that correct?
No,
Is that what Jay said?
no,
Sorry, what?
they're the 4th.
We have
Okay.
P and Z next week, and didn't EDC
Uh-uh.
next week also?
Yes.
Yes,
Is P&Z next week?
yes, ma'am.
P&Z and then EDC, P&Z meeting was canceled, I thought.
No, ma'am,
Okay.
no.
Thursday's out. That's Jill's birthday, my birthday, and Jimmy's birthday.
And y'all are
We don't
having a
do-
party.
Don't bother y'all. That day.
Cake day.
Well, next week doesn't look real good. So, how does everybody feel about Monday night, the 13th?
That's my Kundalini yoga class, but okay.
Your idea.
I'll make that work.
Actually,
We're leaving
Oh,
on
you
the,
can't on Monday. Mondays in general?
no, just that one particular Monday.
we're leaving on what day, Jay? What day are we leaving, Jay?
Oh, we're leaving on that Tuesday.
That's what I thought. So that leaves us the 13th and only the 13th. Yes, Rebecca.
May I ask this city attorney a question about procedures? So when we go to workshop and we decide on adjustments, does it then have to go back to P and Z for a new recommendation?
The way your ordinances are written, that would go back to the planning and zoning.
Okay, so in that case, we have the time anyway, because the
Mhm.
P and Z won't meet again until the following month.
Yeah, so we've got, and I don't think this is a short enough subject that we could have a workshop prior to the city council meeting, because I think this could be an ordeal in and of
A whole
itself.
different day. So what about the,
We've got the 21st, 22nd, 23rd is the council meeting, maybe.
21st or 22nd work for anybody?
That's Monday or Tuesday.
Works for
Or
me.
it's a Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe.
Tom, I know you're probably the
No,
only one
after
with a restriction.
No, after next week, I'm clear. I just have a medical appointment that one Monday that you talked about.
So why don't we shoot for Tuesday, the 21st at 5:30?
Works for me.
Is that good with everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
And I believe, council, that this is not, your desire is not to have a joint workshop, but for us to just discuss it as a body.
With, I mean, for any P and Z or community member to attend it, as any workshop, yeah, but just a council workshop, I think is sufficient, and we'll just
But we
send
don't
it
try to
back.
coordinate a workshop with P and Z as well,
I would rather
so.
get what we want on it with the community and then get it back to P
I
and Z
agree.
for review.
Anything further from council? Okay, then it looks like we're having a workshop on the 21st of May at 5:30. Okay, discussion of item C, discussion of possible action on an ordinance amending Article 1.03 City Council of the Bandera Code of Ordinances. We've been looking at this thing for a while. There's one thing that I noticed that I would really like to have addressed, and that's on the very first page, if you have this with you. Section 1.03.001, residency requirements. The local government code says that the mayor has to be a registered voter and a resident for 1 year of the city of Bandera.
I have one, is that a registered voter in the city? Okay, so a registered voter in the city, not just a registered voter.
No, registered voter.
I would refer
Oh,
to
just a
Dan.
registered voter.
Dan,
It just says registered
If you
voter.
Yeah.
don't register in the
We-
city, you're registered as a voter.
yeah,
Yeah.
it just
But I
says
mean, you have
registered
to-
voter.
Do you have to be eligible to vote in the city?
Dan,
It does not say that. It says you have to be a registered voter
period.
and must have resided within the municipal limits for at least the 12 months preceding the election day.
So you could be registered to vote in North Carolina.
Does not say you have to be a registered voter of the city. It says you have to have resided here. Now, voter registration law, I mean, without getting into all that, as far as when you can vote and versus how long you've resided somewhere, those things come into play. You also have to comply with the election code qualifications. So in your code right now, in this article that I got to you through Jay, these sections are already existing. This is what you're, if anything that you see, anytime you see parentheses and a date and a section, that is what's currently in your code. Anything that doesn't have that is an addition. And the mayor's correct that, you know, what's there now is not sufficient. It doesn't even comply with what the state laws require of you. How y'all want to phrase that is entirely up to you. If you want to just cross-reference the requirements in state law, we can add a cross-reference to the local government code and the election code. If we put the specifics of the local government code and the election code in your local ordinance and they change, then you have to amend your local ordinance. As it's written now, and I had this, the mayor and I had this discussion, even though any of your candidates still have to comply with the local government code and the elections code, it's often confusing for potential candidates or the public because they think that they just have to comply with this section as it's written. So the whole intent would be to make that more clear. I don't know that I recommend putting all the specifics from state law in your local ordinance, but rather cross-references to the local government code and election code.
I would like to see it phrased that way, just cross-reference.
I agree too. And I've read through all of the rest of this. If we could get your folks to change that into whatever you think would be the most appropriate language. And I've looked through all of the rest of this. We've already corrected the meeting date. I think that's Thursday at 5:30. And the section 103.038, item B and C has been changed to one council member, not two, to make it quorum.
Wait, sorry, tell me where that is again?
It's on
Page
page
three.
3, 103.038.
Okay, I see it.
And then, as I read through the rest of this, the only thing that's come up to us, and Glenn brought it up, he and I talked about this, is there any limitation that I, as the chair, during the public speaking part, other than the 3 minutes, I'd like that 5 minutes changed to 3 minutes for the public speaking. Because people begin to just ramble and rant and carry on, and about, you know, the fire hydrant's green, it should be purple. Can I have any, I'm looking at, page 4,
Visitors to be heard.
citizen forms / public comment.
Oh, uh-huh.
I
So-
mean, can I stop them from ranting and raving and carrying on, or do I have to allow them a full 3 minutes no matter what?
So you can put more restrictions on them than what you have, than what we currently suggest here. So some examples. So I have some client cities who only allow public comment by citizens of the city. I have some clients who only allow public comment on items on the agenda. And then I have some where it's unlimited, you can discuss anything. Now, the issue that you have is that if you've never limited public comment in those ways, then you could be challenged on that because you have created a forum, right? You've created a limited public forum. You've told your public, hey, if you come here, you get to speak for this amount of time, and we don't have any limitations on them. Now, you can put limitations on conduct, though, right? I mean, you have to be. You can put basic limitations such as you must be respectful, you must address only the council, no derogatory comments. I mean, you can put things such as that in there if we don't have that in here already. But also bearing in mind that if conduct is serious enough to disrupt a public meeting, that's why Mr. Dietrich, Marshall Dietrich, is here in the first place. So he can, if ever needed. I mean, that's why you keep your marshal here. So.
Man.
Yeah, when we discussed this before, what I was talking about in particular is, I want people to come and rant. If they're mad about something, I want to know about it. But when they come in here to target an individual council member or something like that, and they get belligerent and abusive, that's what I would like to see limited.
Yeah, it becomes almost a character assassination sometimes.
Sure.
I can't quote this piece of the Texas Open Meetings Act that I'm thinking of, but when it was in regards to public comment, and I read it to understand that we can't limit, only by time can we limit, we can only limit the length that someone speaks, not the content of what they're speaking about.
Without reading what you read, I disagree with that. But again, I would caution you based upon what your prior actions have been. So for example, I also have client cities who don't allow public comment. And you know what? They don't have to allow public comment. If they've never allowed public comment, they don't have to. If they start, then they've created a limited public forum and they're going to always have public comment. Then I have some who have it at the end of the agenda. But if you started with it at the beginning of an agenda, probably going to have trouble moving it to the end of the agenda, if that makes sense. So it's very fact specific based on each city and based on how you have previously policed that forum that you've allowed to be created. And it's a limited public forum. When it's limited, that means you can put limitations on that forum. It's not an open public forum.
On page 4, section 10340, all individuals wishing to be heard may do so on all matters except one personnel matters. And so I think that's already a rule about you can't go on about council members or somebody like that. And I think that would be an area if you wanted to maybe expand it, be more precise and inclusive of that kind of behavior. I think we've got a good starting point there.
So there's an attorney general opinion on disruptive conduct and things such as this that some of my cities want. They list it on every agenda as a warning, as with their public comment section. It says disruptive behavior and goes on, won't be allowed, tolerated, and it has the cite to the attorney general's opinion. And we can certainly include that on your agendas and within this. Well, we wouldn't include it here because this is going to actually be an ordinance that's going to be codified, so we don't want to include a citation for an attorney general's opinion, but we can reference the conduct.
And remember, council, too, that this is a much expanded version of chapter 1.03 than we have as our codified ordinance right now. These go into details that we don't currently have, so this would be an amended ordinance. And
And Mayor, this would also apply to city council members making accusations about city employees as well, right, in a public forum?
In a public forum, I would call it down, yeah.
Yeah.
But this also goes further than just the council. This also applies to any public official, being a P and Z member or an EDC member or a, let's say we form a committee for some reason or another. Everyone is held to the same code of conduct.
So I have one other thing, if we can go back to the residency requirement. I thought I had read somewhere where it was like a 6-month for city council.
I
That you
was
had
sworn I
to,
did too, Lynn, but I can't find it.
So, actually, it's not. Well, if you're in a home rule municipality, that's the case. But in a general law city, to be eligible for the office of alderman, which
Right.
y'all are, of the municipality, a person must be a registered voter and must reside on election day in the ward from which the person may be elected. So, you have to live there on election day.
yeah. And registered voter doesn't necessarily mean a
Doesn't-
registered voter in the city.
Well, in the local government code, it doesn't. I don't have the election code with me, so
Oh, okay.
so there may be more to that than just what is listed.
Well,
here.
let's double check on that, but again, we can't restrict the residency requirement for all.
No, and we can't
Correct.
impose a 6-month residency as well?
That is correct.
Okay.
Rebecca?
Would it be beneficial to also cross-reference the local government code and election code for council residency requirements? As you mentioned for the mayor.
Well, that is mayor and city council. That first
Oh,
one
I
is
apologize, I thought that was mayor only.
right. So yes, so we would cross-reference it.
Thank
for both of them.
Lynn?
I would just caution this council about trying to make any decision to limit eligibility for offices and boards and commissions. I mean, we have a very small population to draw from. We've already limited the people that can run for council by having 5:30 meetings. You know, anyone that commutes to San Antonio is pretty much out of it. So just a word of caution, you know, we need to think these things through.
I think we're just gonna, the only thing that we're doing on this residency requirement is to follow the law. That's all we're doing
Yeah, I
there.
just wanna, before we vote on it, I wanna see it put together and presented to us.
Any other comment, any other changes that the council would like to discuss? Okay, then I think we're good to go on this one, get that
So,
first
on the,
one revised.
so no questions on any of the rest of the. Okay.
If you
The
can send
actual
us the-
council ethics.
If you can just send us the language for 1.03.2.
Well, what I'll do is I'll amend this and send it to Jay to have it on your next agenda
Great.
Good deal,
with the adopting ordinance.
thank you. Any other discussion about the Article 103 City Council? I just want to interject here real quick, that we're doing these agenda items here tonight because Dan is here, and we've all had questions in the past few months that need to be addressed as a council, I believe, and not just as an individual council person with our attorney. Okay. Item D, discussion of possible action on the process for the approval of expenditures for the Bandera Economic Development Corporation. Bryce, I think this was one of your suggestions,
Yes,
requests?
yes. I just had some questions, and in doing my research, just trying, we, both the City Council and the Economic Development Corporation, have made great strides in cleaning up things in the last several years. I understand there's been a lot of that, and transparency's been a big key to making all this happen. In that, I'm trying to put together information. I'm just trying to track down whether it be contracts that do or do not exist, our clawback provisions on those. We made great strides in establishing what the protocols would be for people or organizations coming in to request money, and that had been followed pretty well, but then lately, that's not exactly, unless I'm missing something in the case, specifically Tractor Supply, I'm mentioning on that. Trying to figure out our loans outstanding, because it seems like there's some out there. I know we had questions on, there's just questions on money that's out there right now. I've not spoken to Jay yet about the May 1st deadline for the hotel being up and the monies that have been promised for that. And with that date passing us now, there's a significant amount of money that has been addressed with it.
No, actually, there's contract extensions with the TDA, so we're good till July
And
2020.
that affects the EDC movements to that.
The 380 agreement.
Do you need to amend by the agreement? Art?
I would prefer to not talk, there's 4 EDC members in here. There's a quorum.
I'll walk outside.
Well, as of this minute, there's zero money out.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm sorry, what's the question?
The question is, in your performance agreement or whatever contract you have,
The
the
380?
EDC has with the hotel,
Are we talking about the 380 agreement? I just want to clarify.
the 380 is between the city.
Oh, okay. So
Not
we're not
the
talking about the
EDC.
380.
That is an EDC question. The question is,
I believe this is the performance agreement on them having everything operational and employees in place by May 1st of this year for the hotel for almost a sum of $240,000. What is the status on that? Is there going to be an amendment on it? Because I understand there's been some things out of their control. I'm just wondering where we're at with that.
So to my knowledge, there is not a date tied to the EDC or the 380 contract, other than that all contracts coincide with the TCF grant. So whatever the TCF grant gives them a extension, it automatically applies to the 380 and the EDC money. So no money is spent through the 380 or the EDC until they're up and running, and have been up and running for 1 year.
Okay, so the May 1st deadline with employment and everything is, where does that come from? Do I need to produce that, I guess, and ask you?
If that's part of the TCF grant, the grant has deadlines all throughout it, and I believe Ms. Harden is the one who applies for those extensions. And if the state is happy, then the city and the EDC are happy, basically.
Look into that.
okay, I want to make this comment too. I believe that the effort that's been made by EDC and the city staff to coordinate, because we get a package with the entire contract, every piece of paper, every number adds up, everything's good. If there is an issue, I know of 3 that have been thrown back, and so it is working, and I'd like us to give it time to work before we try to do anything else or review this again. Lynn?
I think Deanna is doing an excellent job. She is really making sure that all the i's are dotted, the t's are crossed, and that everybody has their attachments. And she's just really doing a really good job making everything transparent. You can go into this EDC drawer now and find everything since she's taken over that is coincides to the checks that have been paid out, and she's doing an excellent job. Excellent job.
And she's still tracking receipts on these different facade grants, I'm not facade grants, but these performance grants, whatever you call them over there. So she's still tracking the receipts, she's still making sure everything's being done, and I'm really proud of the changes that we've made in moving forward. Anything else? Lynn?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we just had a workshop not too long ago with the EDC, and I thought we pretty much ironed everything out, so, yeah, I'm in agreement, we need to just let it settle in.
Any other comments?
So there's, I believe, 51 outstanding contracts out there, and not able to find a lot of them, even though we've got a bunch of stuff here in city council, or here at City Hall. There's a lot of contracts out, we just was trying to locate them, and I can't, so that I'd like to figure out how to do. And then, again, we agreed on how the process would be, and Tractor Supply did not follow that process. And that's all on public record and whatnot, and yet it was still moved forward on, and I just haven't been to each of the meetings, and I'm just trying to figure out why. We're making great progress, we absolutely are. However, let's stick to what we agreed to in that same workshop, so that we can move forward and be, equitable across the board.
What are you talking about? The only thing Tractor Supply requested was funding for the lift station. Is there more?
I can put it back together if you like. And
But, like I said, you know, Deanna has been doing an excellent job making sure that there's checks and balances. And she took over that position like, I think in January. And everything that you check now is all good. I mean, I think that she's trying to find all of the stuff prior to that because there was a lot missing prior to that. There was not the correct documentation that needed to be done for writing the checks.
Okay.
But she's doing an excellent job now. I don't have any complaints.
nope, no complaints at all.
All right, everybody move on?
Look at this.
Okay, item E, discussion and direction regarding the interpretation of and possible amendments to code provisions applicable to local bed and breakfast operations. Mr. Santee, I understand that you've been approached by folks wanting to know if we can restrict them, get rid of them, move them.
So, somewhat, I received an email from the council, you know, regarding enforcement of the existing ordinance, and I reviewed what is currently on your books, and there's a conflict in the sense that you don't have bed and breakfast defined in your zoning ordinance as a use, and so because of that, when you look at the section on bed and breakfast, and it talks about, and I'm sorry I don't have that section with me, but it talks about what's allowed in single family, and how many structures and how many residences and things such as that. A bed and breakfast, without it being defined somewhere, I don't know, and your code enforcement doesn't know, does it have to be, is it one structure where that is a residence where someone lives? Typically a bed and breakfast, traditionally, the person lives on site, you know, in the structure. It's not an unattended, a bed and breakfast is not an unattended structure. Like if I rent on VRBO or something such as that, and I get the run of the place, right? I get a key code, and nobody's making me food or anything. I've rented the whole house, basically. That's just short-term rental, right? As opposed to a bed and breakfast. Traditionally, a bed and breakfast has a caretaker, somebody living there, and you have different rooms, and so that's traditionally. Now, without any definition of what we're referring to, it's going to be hard to say yes or no that a bed and breakfast can or cannot legally operate in single-family residential if we do allow accessory structures and we allow accessory uses. Does that make sense? So right now you have a limit on how many structures, how large a lot can be, and but you also can have primary uses and secondary uses. Now, that's a lot of information, but the long story short, if you're going to enforce right now, as it's currently written on bed and breakfast, we need a definition. We need to know, our code enforcement officer needs to know what exactly he's looking for and what are the limitations that are in place for the operation of the bed and breakfast. Because we don't have enough specifics. Yes, sir.
Okay, if it allowed, so if we determine it's allowed, I mean, isn't that by definition of business being run in the residential area?
That's, no. Well, depend, y'all can say that. You'd have to say that in your, I mean, we would have to define it as such. A bed and breakfast is those are typically in residential areas. I mean, it's a residential home. So if it's going to be a bed and breakfast, it's typically going to be in a residential or a mixed-use neighborhood in most communities. But y'all have control of that. I mean, it's not what I say. It's what do we put in the code and we want to enforce and how we want to regulate that. What uses go in which zones is entirely in the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So if we only want to allow bed and breakfast, or however we define it, in central business or whatever your classification is, certainly that y'all have the authority to do that.
Have any other council members, since I've been on council, that's a complaint I hear all the time, all the bed and breakfast. And I understand why they're happening, you know, a lot of the people that I grew up with, you know, they're inheriting properties, but they have a family and they live off somewhere else, so they're selling them off, and a lot of them are being grabbed up, you know. people are trying to add an extra. To me, the way it reads, they're not allowed. But, like Dan said, maybe it needs more definition.
I thought that we were only allowed to have bed and breakfast in certain zoning areas. I did not realize that we are allowed to, I guess the way it's written, you can have bed and breakfast throughout the city.
I think it's unclear
Okay.
with how I would phrase it. I would hate to give everybody the impression to go out and start having a bed and breakfast
Yeah.
wherever they're living. That's not my intent. I do think it needs to be clarified. The other issue, just as a forewarning that you're gonna have, is you do have a lot of short-term rental properties in Bandera, Texas. This is a hot little town for short-term rentals. Y'all have a lot of good stuff going on here. It's a good problem to have. But if we're gonna distinguish between bed and breakfast and where a bed and breakfast can operate, and we're not gonna distinguish at all where a short-term rental can be, just be prepared for that discussion to take place as well, because they're not being run very differently.
What's the difference? I don't see there's any difference in them at all.
Well, traditionally, the difference is that a bed and breakfast, the owner occupies the structure.
Yeah, but that ain't happening, so.
Then it's
these
not a
are
bed and
all
breakfast.
short-term.
That's why I said we need to define what we're talking about. Because if we're talking about a bed and breakfast, that's a very specific thing in land use, okay? Versus short-term rentals, which is, any of your properties can be a short-term rental. You list it on VRBO or one of those sites, and rent it out by the day. And pay hotel, you have to collect your hotel occupancy tax, but
Lynn,
I was just gonna ask Glenn, why don't you like to see the bed and breakfasts or the short-term rentals
The way,
in?
the way I read the ordinance, you're allowed one dwelling on a single lot. And how many of them, there's a bunch of them down in my neighborhood, where there's two of them. If it's not under a single roof, to me, that's a separate dwelling. Now, is it, well, like Dan said, you can't really call it a bed and breakfast. What is it? It's a rental. Are we allowed to have rental property, houses next to our house on a single lot?
Short-term rentals. Because we allow rentals, I mean, people can rent homes.
Sure.
But you're
But
talking about.
the code, the way it reads is one dwelling, a single lot.
you don't allow, Lynn's point is we don't allow an accessory dwelling. It used to be called sweet mother-in-law home, or no, an in-law home, either the
Don't get
secondary.
derogatory.
I'm not trying to, but you don't know my mother-in-law, so.
Mother-in-law house.
then council, do you, okay, two ways to go here. Do we wanna talk to P and Z about this and have, or get an opinion from Dan, draft a reversion of the ordinance? How do you wanna handle it? Go ahead.
I think it would be critical to have more dialogue with the people that this will impact beforehand, as we've seen with our sign ordinance recently. In terms of the accessory dwellings or accessory structures that are already out there, I don't know what, I mean, they're not allowed to, I can't go and build a cottage in the back of, on the back of my lot to rent it out, right? According to the ordinances, I'd love to, but I can't. So I don't know really the significance in discussing structures that are already here. But in moving forward and cleaning things up so that the future is clear, I would just like to make it a big enough conversation that everyone has their input and we really realize the value that these short-term rentals do provide in the community. And we have a lot of vacant houses that nobody's fixing up or renting, and so for these operations to be taking place, there is an added value there.
If I could just add one
Sure.
other thing, so there's a lot of questions here that y'all should address, and most of them are, aside from what Glenn has identified that needs to be looked at as far as cleaned up, the bigger question that, and I think you're touching on this, Rebecca, is that from a policy standpoint, before we start cleaning anything up, we need to know if you want the policy to be that y'all are going to allow secondary dwellings. Because if you are, it's really not a question of whether or not it's bed and breakfast or it's a short-term rental. It's, do you want to allow people to build those smaller cottages? And if you do, and I'm not saying you do, but it's a discussion worth having, do you want to talk about the sizes and the setbacks? Because it's not going to be enough for Jay and myself trying to fix the problem to just say, yeah, we want to allow them, or no, we don't want to allow them. We need to know the specifics of, not only are you going to allow them, but is there a limitation on the square footage? What are the setbacks going to be? And what can they be used for? Can I rent it out? And the reality is that a lot of cities that are similarly situated to Bandera have made that decision. And I know Bandera is very unique, and y'all reject being compared to anyone because there is no comparison to Bandera. I believe that at this point. But places like Fredericksburg and places that have downtown similar to what you have, they have decided to allow these for that very reason, because of all the visitors that want to come and watch cowboys stroll through downtown. And you don't have a large stock of hotels yet that they can stay in. So they're taking their money to Kerrville and Bernie and staying and coming over.
And also, I think it's relevant to mention your, and I don't have the census material in front of me. I know we had gotten it together, but we have a low enough mean household income to qualify as a low-income community for certain grants. There are people who live here who might not be able to afford their home. Could they not rent out a piece of it? And that's part of their income. And we don't have a huge economic industry here to allow people to make money and live well and afford and maintain their homes.
But then again, that comes to my mind, that brings, okay, so now we've got somebody renting out a portion of their home, they're now subject to a
Hotel.
hot tax.
Mm-hmm. So they're paying.
That
And-
should be, they should be paying
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
And, Glenn,
Yeah, I think the main point we need to look at here is try and enforce laws. I mean, because this puts a burden on, you know, our code enforcement too, you know. I mean, he looks at the ordinance, you know, and like I said, you can read it 2 or 3 different ways. But if it's not gonna be single family, you know, then something needs to be changed.
Lynn,
And I don't have anything against the short-term rentals or the bed and breakfasts, but I would like to see people moving into Bandera and buying these houses. And there's a shortness of that as well, because so many of them are being inherited by their children that don't want to you know, they, for some reason they can't sell it, or, you know, so they're making more money on the short-term rentals rather than having somebody move into the city and be counted in our population for the census and living in that house and being counted for that.
Glenn,
All you have to do is go to the real estate listings for these empty houses and you can see why people want to sell them.
Why?
The prices are so high, I mean, it's ridiculous what they're asking.
all right then, council,
Suggesting a workshop.
a workshop? Woohoo, workshop waiting over there. Do you want a joint workshop with P and Z to get them involved?
Yeah, and don't we have, didn't we create a list of some of these operations that we could specifically mail out letters to invite them to join the conversation?
I would like
Right?
that.
Okay.
I believe we have what, Kitty, 42?
40-something.
The more the merrier.
Yes, we do have a list.
And we'll schedule that one.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
We don't have to schedule that one right this minute, do we?
Well, yeah, we need to,
Okay.
that gives you an opportunity to coordinate with P and Z and
Great.
get that one going. So if that's good with y'all, we'll move on.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, item F is discussion and direction regarding city council members continuing to serve as voting members on other city council appointed boards and commissions. Glenn?
How many times are we gonna have this conversation? You, Dan, spoken to us about it? I yield to.
I think we're gonna have this conversation every time a council member doesn't like who's applying to be on a board.
Okay.
We're following state law.
I certainly hope so. To my knowledge, you are. I'm not here every time, but to my knowledge, yes, you are.
I have a
following
conflict with it. I'm sorry. I don't really like the fact that we have city council members serving on the EDC. What I would like to have seen happen, which is obviously not, you know, what you guys are, your opinion about it, but what I felt like is that if you had an EDC member or a planning and zoning member that runs for a city council position, if they get elected, I would like for them to remove themselves. But if that's not the consensus of the rest of the council, that's fine. I think we have plenty of people that want to be in these positions. We have a large pool. You keep saying we don't, but we do. We have plenty of people from the ED that filed applications for the EDC positions that are not you know, people that want to. I'm sorry. That was my reasoning. I put this on here. I was just hoping that if you got elected while you're serving on a board onto the city council, that maybe you would just remove yourself for appearance reasons. But if not, I mean, that's not the law, so you don't have to.
I'd like to hear from Tom on this.
Sure.
When I was elected, I raised the question in a public meeting, should I resign the EDC? And there was a strong consensus that no, why should you? And if the letter of the law says it's fine, the spirit of the law says it's fine, from an ethical standpoint, it's fine, from a precedent standpoint, that there have been many council members on these boards, it's fine. I'm wondering what the agenda is, or, you know, if I'm not doing the job, fine, but.
I don't think we're picking on you precisely.
But, you know, so why is the issue being raised, like Glenn said again and again and again?
Well, let's get this, I'm glad you said, and very eloquently stated, by the way.
Right, and not to disagree with you, Lynn, but I like having the continuity, and as was mentioned earlier, if someone's on the EDC, there's things that are brought to city council that we're not privy to everything unless you go to all the meetings that are going on. So EDC spends a lot of time deliberating and researching what's going on, so when they come up to make a decision here, Tom's probably better informed on a lot of things than we are, just because he's participating in that piece as well. So,
But is he allowed to give us that information?
Bryce has a table, please.
so for a continuity standpoint, using your word on that for continuity's sake, I like it, to be honest. And I know someone else said it was a conflict of interest, but legally, the state has recognized that it's okay, and it's obviously been fleshed out before, so I don't see it as a problem personally. And if you have anything to say contrary to that, I'm sure it's been fleshed out quite a bit.
Right, no, for EDCs, for type B, which y'all are, it's specifically authorized. The only restriction that it has is that no more than 3 members of the EDC may be members of the governing body or employees. I mean, you can point your city administrator if you want. For a type A, y'all are in type A, but by comparison, for a type A, I've actually had this happen. The council can appoint itself, and they can do away with the board and appoint themselves in their place if they get upset with the board, and I've seen that happen. So there's no restriction for type A; they can act as the board. You have that same situation with Planning and Zoning Commission, and the mayor will tell you that I've actually told her in the past, you know, if you're having so much trouble with your Planning and Zoning Commission, now, if they're here, this was a long time ago, but, and it wasn't personal. I was just letting her know in case she didn't that, you know, you can remove them. The city council can sit as the Planning and Zoning Commission, just like you already sit as the Board of Adjustment, and you sit as the Board of Appeals. And while that might sound odd, that is allowed for the very reasons that have been stated here previously. If you don't have a deep pool, and I'm not saying y'all don't, but some cities, it's hard to find the people to sit on all those boards and commissions. And it's even harder once you find them to make sure you have a quorum when you need to conduct business. And so often, type C, type B, type A general law municipalities where there's 1,000 or fewer people, well, often the council sits in those roles because by gosh, you can have those meetings like we did tonight. We had the Board of Appeals meeting before we had our council meeting. And I have cities that are on the cusp of being a home rule municipality that are still doing that. They'll sit as the Board of Adjustment, and then they'll sit as the city council right after that, because that's how they've always done it since they were a smaller general law city, and it works for them. It's not a legal conflict under the statute because it's specifically authorized. And it's not dual office holding because they're not offices of emolument when you're talking about these other appointed boards and commissions.
And I understand all that. I understand the law. I know it's not a dual. I understand all that. I just was thinking that that's what I would like to see happen, but it's not against the law. I know that it's not illegal, and I'm
but it
fine
is
with
something,
that.
you're correct, that y'all can control if you
Yeah.
choose to. It is something that y'all can
And that it's obvious.
self-restrict.
It's obvious that nobody else agrees, so we can move on.
We can move on.
I don't totally disagree with you. As soon as, when I was on the EDC, as soon as I was elected to city council, I resigned from the EDC, but that was for personal reasons, you know. I'd rather do volunteer work and stuff like that, rather than, you know, all of my time tied up with committees and stuff. And I really appreciate the people that do volunteer to sit on these boards, because I disagree with you that we're just flooded with applicants.
Qualified applicants, I think it's the biggest. Okay, moving on. Remember, these are things that have come up that we're just talking about since Dan is here tonight. Item G is discussion regarding the state nepotism laws found in Government Code Chapter 573, Subchapter C. Lynn?
Yeah, and I asked this to be on the agenda, and it's pretty well self-explanatory unless somebody else has any questions about it. I don't have any questions.
Well, I believe where you and I disagree on this is, yes, this is very self-explanatory. But I think that nepotism refers to some sort of monetary gain. I
Right.
don't believe you can apply nepotism to commissions and committees.
Right.
Which is, you know, so we on the
Oh,
same
I
page now?
understand all that, yeah.
Okay.
I understand.
Right, I think just to clarify,
What is- Could we really clarify like what this is about?
so yeah, I think I can clear that. So the discussion that I've had with Lynn is just in the sense of when does this apply and when does it not? Because like, for example, council members, this body does receive, my understanding is you do receive some compensation for serving on the city council, some per meeting or per month amount of money.
Yes.
So even if it's $1, it is an office of emolument. So so just to clarify, but that's different than, for example, the EDC or the Board of Appeals. You know, when y'all sit as these other boards, there is no issue with any of this because those are not paid positions on any of those appointed boards. And I think so. That was what I was trying to clarify in the context of how does the nepotism law work versus what can y'all do as a local body if you wanted to restrict who can be appointed or who can serve on your other boards and commissions. That wouldn't be a nepotism issue. That would just be a local control issue. And our discussion was in the context of the rules and stuff that y'all are adopting on your ethics and your rules of conduct and rules of order and things such as that. If you wanted to self-regulate either how many people can serve on or who can be appointed to those, you certainly have the ability to do that, even if it doesn't violate the state nepotism law. Does that make sense? So that was the context of the discussion.
Does that, to clarify, because I remember you had abstained when Andrea was appointed to the EDC, but that wasn't necessary.
Was
Is that
not,
correct?
it was not necessary.
Okay.
It was not necessary because it's not appointing a family member to a
paid position.
yes, to a position they would be paid for.
So it's all about the money.
Well, it is now to clarify though. Again, I want to make and I want this can't be overstated that it is with regard to the nepotism laws and what that is, but not necessarily when it comes to the ethics rules. Once y'all adopt those, you don't have those in place right now. But for example, let's say the council ethics rules that we adopt and make a law, because it would be an ordinance, that could prohibit you from, I mean, well, you abstained anyway, but it might dictate that you abstain but if he violates that, it wouldn't be a violation of the nepotism law, it'd be a violation of your local law, your local ordinance ethics code. Does that make sense? So that, Rebecca, that was the reason for the discussion, and so it is an important discussion, because I wanted to make sure that the council understands that when you adopt these rules of procedure, decorum, and ethics, that you are choosing to regulate yourselves, because I can't do it, Jay can't do it. You're choosing to impose things on yourselves that don't currently exist, which is good and fine, but we have to make sure we understand what those are when the time comes and what those violations can be. But I know y'all read them, every word of that, or will before you adopt it.
Any discussion further on this, then? Anybody? Rebecca? All right. Let's move on to item H, discussion of possible action to move the regular city council meeting date from May 16th, 2019 to May 23rd, 2019, just because we're going to be going to a conference, a small city problem solving conference.
So move.
Lynn move. Everybody second, Rebecca first. Any discussion? All in favor? All in favor, no opposed. Okay, item I, staff update on the city logo contest. Go ahead, staff.
We closed the final day was yesterday, and what we will do, we have a group that we have put together that's going to choose 3. We're gonna bring them to y'all, let y'all look at them, y'all can say don't like any of them, throw them out, we start over, make recommendations to change, or pick one you love, or however y'all see fit, and then we will hopefully come out with a new logo.
And the committee selected was you, me, Jill, go ahead.
You, myself, Jill, Keely, Laura, I don't remember all of them off the top of my head.
Yeah, but it's a
Yes,
it's a variety of city
employees.
employees to do the preliminary
Mhm.
choosing to bring to y'all.
Thank you guys for doing.
Any questions about the logo? All right, item 10. 10A, the city council of Bandera will consult in closed session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074 personnel matters regarding the annual evaluation, duties, and salary of the city administrator, Stan Horry. Mr. Horry, do you want to do this about the closed session?
Close, please.
Closed it is. At 8:04. Recessing the regular meeting.